Hello students, welcome to the lecture on supply analysis, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the meaning and the concept of supply and demand, define determinants and changes in supply, understand the law of supply, discuss the elasticity of supply, describe the economic relationship between quantity supplied and prices. Let's start with the concept of supply analysis. Supply in economics has a slightly different meaning to the word supply as it is used in everyday conversation. In the latter, supply is most often used as a verb to provide someone with something. In economics, however, supply is defined as the amount of a good or a service that a producer is willing and able to supply across a range of prices. Just like demand, the supply for a particular good would cover all ranges of prices. It can be visualized with each price value having a corresponding amount of goods supplied. If one is referring to the amount supplied for a specific price value, the phrase quantity supplied can be used. Change the supply of a good. Since the supply of a good includes the quantity supplied for each price level, something that affects the supply would have to change this quantity supplied for every price. Changing the price so that a greater amount of the good is supplied would not count as a change in supply because the supply takes into account different quantities supplied at different price levels. This would be a change in the quantity supplied and an extension in supply if the quantity supplied increased, or a contraction in supply if the quantity supplied decreased. Let us now discuss the meaning and the concept of supply and demand. Supply and demand is a fundamental factor in shaping the character of the marketplace, for it is understood as the principal determinant in establishing the cost of goods and services. The availability or the supply of goods or services is a key consideration in determining the price at which those goods or services can be obtained. For example, a landscaping company with little competition that operates in an area of high demand for such services will in all likelihood be able to command a higher price than will a business operating in a highly competitive environment. But availability is only one half of the equation that determines pricing structures in the marketplace.
Supply and demand. If you've only heard of one economics concept, it's probably supply and demand. Eventually we'll want to derive this concept from basic assumptions about utility and cost functions, but for now I'll just go through the 2-minute version. Let's start with supply. A supply curve is a relationship between the price of a certain good and the amount of that good producers make. Let's say they're producing umbrellas. Supply curves typically slope upwards, since a higher price means producers can earn more from each item they sell, so it's worth it for them to produce more of that item. Now, on to demand. A demand curve is a relationship between the price of a certain good and the amount of that good buyers want to buy. Although there are exceptions, most demand curves slope downwards. Intuitively, you'll buy more of something if it's cheaper. If we graph our supply curve and our demand curve together, we get this cool little X. The price at which supply and demand cross is the market clearing price. If the price is at the market clearing level, producers produce exactly as many umbrellas as buyers want to buy. So every umbrella is sold, and everyone who wants to buy an umbrella can do so. What if the price of umbrellas is higher than the market clearing price? Then producers make more umbrellas than buyers are willing to buy at that price, and we have a surplus. Similarly, if the price of umbrellas is set below the market clearing price, buyers want to buy lots of umbrellas, but producers aren't so eager to produce that many, so we have a shortage of umbrellas.
Economists have a very precise definition of supply. Economists describe supply as a relationship between the quantities of a good or service consumers will offer for sale and the price charged for that good. Factors impacting supply and demand. When using the term demand, most people think the word means a certain volume of spending, as when we say that the demand for cars has fallen off or the demand for paper is high. But that is not what economists mean when using the term. For economists, demand means not just how much we are spending for a given item, but how much we are spending for that item at its price and how much we would spend if its price changed. Supply curves. A supply curve is simply a supply schedule presented in graphical form. The standard presentation of a supply curve has price given on the y-axis and quantity supplied on the x-axis. Working of a supply curve. The law of supply is conveniently illustrated by a supply curve. In particular, it is illustrated by the positive slope of a supply curve such as the one presented to the right. Supply and demand relationship. Now that we know the laws of supply and demand, let us turn to an example to show how supply and demand affect price. Imagine that a special edition CD of favorite band is released for $20. Because the record company's analysis showed that the consumers will not demand CDs at a price higher than $40, only 10 CDs were released because the opportunity cost is too high for suppliers to produce more. Equilibrium. When supply and demand are equal, that is when the supply function and the demand function intersect, the economy is said to be at equilibrium. At this point, the allocation of goods is at its most efficient because the amount of goods being supplied is exactly the same as the amount of goods being demanded. Disequilibrium. Disequilibrium occurs when the price or the quantity is not equal to P or Q. Excess supply. If the price is set too high, excess supply will be created within the economy and there will be locative inefficiency. Excess demand. Excess demand is created when price is set the equilibrium price. Because the price is so low, too many consumers want the goods while producers are not making enough of it. Shift versus movement. For economics, the movements and shifts in relation to the supply and demand curves represent very different market phenomena. Movements. A movement refers to a change along a curve. On the demand curve, a movement denotes a change in both price and quantity demanded from one point to another on the curve. Shifts. A shift in a demand or a supply curve occurs when a good's quantity demanded or supplied changes even though price remains the same. Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the determinants and the changes in supply. Cash costs are those which represent actual monetary outlays. Non-cash costs do not directly represent such outlays but are permissible deductions from revenue, the sole impact of which is to reduce the income tax liability. Changes in demand. What are the effects of an increase in demand? As the population of California has grown, the demand for housing has risen. This has pushed the price of housing up and also spurred additional development, increasing the quantity of housing supplied as well. Changes in supply. An increase in supply comes about from a fall in the marginal cost. Recall that the supply curve is just the marginal cost of production. Consequently, an increased supply is represented by a curve that is lower and to the right on the supply or demand graph, which is an endless source of confusion for many students. The reasoning, lower cost and greater supply are the same thing, is too easily forgotten. The supply curve goes from S1 to S2, which represents a low marginal cost. An important source of supply and demand changes are changes in the markets of complements. A decrease in the price of a demand complement increases the demand for a product, and similarly an increase in the price of a demand substitute increases demand for a product. This gives two mechanisms to trace through effects from external markets to a particular market via the linkage of demand substitutes or complements. Let's know the law of supply. Supply and demand is an economic model of price determination in a market. It concludes that in a competitive market, the unit price for a particular good will vary until it settles at a point where the quantity demanded by consumers at the current price will equal the quantity supplied by the producers at the current price, resulting in an economic equilibrium of price and quality. The definition of the law of supply. A microeconomic law stating that, all other factors being equal, as the price of a good or services increases, the quantity of goods or services offered by the suppliers increases, and vice versa.
This is Michaela, and this is a quick lesson on the law of supply. The law of supply states that when price increases, quantity supplied will increase, with the two assumptions of ceteris paribus and vice versa. If you're going to understand the law of supply, you have to understand these two assumptions first. When we say vice versa, we mean that just as an increase in price creates an increase in quantity supplied, a decrease in price will create a decrease in quantity supplied. The two will always move in the same direction. The second assumption of ceteris paribus looks at the meaning of this Latin term, which is all other things held constant. There are two types of factors that affect supply, price factors and non-price factors. When we assume ceteris paribus, we assume that price is the only factor that changes. Non-price factors like competition, the state of technology, or costs of production do not change. These other things are held constant. This is Peeta the baker, and we'll be looking at his supply of bread. Let's assume, under ceteris paribus, that the cost of producing one loaf of bread is $1, and this does not change throughout the example. The vertical axis shows us the price, or the amount that consumers will pay for one loaf of bread. The horizontal axis shows us the quantity, or number of units, or loaves of bread that Peeta is able to supply. Let's say that he can sell one loaf of bread for $2. He is then willing to supply 10 loaves of bread. But imagine if he could sell the same loaf of bread for $6. He's going to be willing to supply more loaves of bread. The reason for this is because it still only costs him $1. The same loaf of bread can make him more money, so he'll supply more loaves of bread. When we connect these points, we create the supply curve for Peeta's bread. We see that an increase in price from $2 to $6 created an increase in the quantity of bread Peeta could supply from 10 loaves to 30 loaves. This follows the law of supply. The rising price created an increase in quantity supplied. This change in quantity supplied is shown by the movement from one point to the other. So remember, the law of supply is that an increase in price will create an increase in quantity supplied, ceteris paribus, and vice versa.
Elasticity of supply. The demand for goods depends on the price for those goods as well as on consumer income and on the prices of other goods. Similarly, supply depends on price as well as on variables that affect production cost. How much the supply and demand will rise or fall is often difficult to predict. This measurement of a product or a service's responsiveness to market changes is known as elasticity. Elasticity is a measure of the responsiveness of one economic variable to another. For example, price elasticity is the relationship between a change in the supply of a good and the demand for that good. Economists are often interested in the price elasticity of demand, which measures the response of the quantity of an item purchased to a change in the item's price. A good or service is considered to be highly elastic if a slight change in price leads to a sharp change in demand for the product or service. Products and services that are highly elastic are usually more discretionary in nature, readily available in the market, and something that a consumer may not necessarily need in his or her daily life. On the other hand, an inelastic good or service is one for which changes in price result in only modest changes in demand. These goods and services tend to be necessities. The degree to which a demand or a supply curve reacts to a change in price is the curve's elasticity. Elasticity varies among products because some products may be more essential to the consumer. Products that are necessities are more insensitive to price changes because consumers would continue buying these products despite price increases. Conversely, a price increase of a good or service that is considered less of a necessity will deter more consumers because the opportunity cost of buying the product will become too high. A good or service is considered to be highly elastic if a slight change in the price leads to a sharp change in the quantity demanded or supplied. Usually these kinds of products are readily available in the market and a person may not necessarily need them in his or her daily life. On the other hand, an inelastic good or service is one in which changes in price witness only modest changes in the quantity demanded or supplied, if any at all. These goods tend to be things that are more of a necessity to the consumer in his or her daily life. Factors affecting demand elasticity. There are three main factors that influence a demand's price elasticity. The availability of substitutes. This is probably the most important factor influencing the elasticity of a good or service. In general, the more substitutes, the more elastic the demand will be. For example, if the price of a cup of coffee went up by $0.24, consumers would replace their morning caffeine with a cup of tea. This means that coffee is an elastic good because a raise in price will cause a large decrease in demand as consumers start buying more tea instead of coffee. Amount of income available to spend on the good. This factor affecting demand elasticity refers to the total a person can spend on a particular good or service. Thus, if the price of a can of Coke goes up from $0.24 to $1 and income stays the same, the income that is available to spend on Coke, which is $20, is now enough for only 2 rather than 4 cans of Coke. In other words, the consumer is forced to reduce his or her demand of Coke. Time. The third influential factor is time. If the price of cigarettes goes up by $20 per pack, a smoker with very few available substitutes will almost likely continue buying his or her daily cigarettes. This means that tobacco is inelastic because a change in price will not have a significant influence on the quantity demanded. Income elasticity of demand. In the second factor outlined, we saw that if price increases while income stays the same, demand will decrease. It follows then that if there is an increase in income, demand tends to increase as well. Income elasticity of demand for Bob's air travel is 7 highly elastic. With some goods and services, we may actually notice a decrease in demand as income increases. These are considered goods and services of inferior quality that will be dropped by a consumer who receives a salary increase. An example may be the increase in the demand of DVDs as opposed to video cassettes, which are generally considered to be of lower quality. Products for which the demand decreases as income increases have an income elasticity of less than 0. Products that witness no change in demand despite a change in income usually have an income elasticity of 0. These goods and services are considered necessities. The economic relationship between quantity supplied and prices. Supply describes the economic relationship between the goods price and how much businesses are willing to provide. Supply is a schedule that shows the relationship between the goods price and the quantity supplied, holding everything else constant. Holding everything else constant seems a little ambitious even for economists, but there is a reason for that qualification. By holding everything else constant, supply enables to focus on the relationship between price and the quantity provided, and that is the critical relationship. The difference between quantities supplied and supply. We must be able to distinguish between two terms that sound the same, quantity supplied and supply, but mean very different things. It is common for others not to make the distinction, and as a result their analysis is confused. Quantity supplied refers to the amount of the good businesses provide at a specific price, so quantity supplied is an actual number. Economists use the term supply to refer to the entire curve. The supply curve is an equation or a line on a graph showing the different quantities provided at every possible price. Graph supply of price and supplied. The supply curves graph shows the relationship between price and quantity supplied. When the price is very high, businesses provide a lot more treats. There's money to be made. But if the price is very low, there's not much money to be made and businesses provide fewer of the item. For example, if the price of dog treats is $5, businesses provide 650 boxes of treats a week. On the other hand, if the price of the treat decreases to $1 a box, the quantity of treats provided decreases to 50 boxes a week. Price changes. Price and quantity supplied are directly related. As price goes down, the quantity supplied decreases. As the price goes up, quantity supplied increases. Supply curve shifts. When economists focus on the relationship between price and quantity supplied, a lot of other things are held constant, such as production cost, technology, and the prices of goods producers considered related. When any one of these things changes, the entire supply curve shifts. If an increase in supply occurs, the curve shifts to the right. In this case, an increase in supply shifted the curve from S0 to S1. As a result, more dog treats are provided at every possible price. For example, at a price of $5, 750 boxes of dog treats are provided each week instead of 650. A rightward shift in the supply curve always indicates an increase in supply, while a leftward shift in the curve indicates a decrease in supply. The factors that shift the supply curve. Production cost. Input prices and resulting production costs are inversely related to supply. In other words, changes in input prices and production cost cause an opposite change in supply. If input price and production cost increase, supply decreases. If input prices and production cost decrease, supply increases. For example, if wages or labor cost increases, the supply of the good decreases. Technology. Technological improvements in production shift the supply curve. Specifically, improvements in technological increase supply a rightward shift in the supply curve. The prices of other goods. Price changes for other goods are a little complicated. First, in order to affect supply, producers must think the goods are related. What consumers think is irrelevant. For example, ranchers think beef and leather are related. They both come from a steer. However, customers do not want to eat leather for dinner. Beef and leather are an example of joint products, products produced together. For joint products, a direct relationship exists between a good's price and the supply of its joint product. If the price of beef increases, ranchers raise more cattle and the supply of beef's joint product leather increases. Producer substitutes also exist. Using the same resources, a business can produce one good or the other. Corn and soybeans are examples of producer substitutes. If the price of corn increases, farmers grow more corn and less land is available to grow soybeans. Soybean supply decreases. An inverse relationship exists between a good's price, corn, and the supply of its producer's substitute, soybeans. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. An important thing to note is that the price being referred to is the price that the good is sold to the consumer at, not any other price. Supply and demand is perhaps one of the most fundamental concepts of economics, and it is the backbone of a market economy. The most important of these are the taste, customs and preferences of the target market, the consumer's income level, the quality of the goods or services being offered, and the availability of competitors' goods or services. When supply and demand are equal, the economy is said to be at equilibrium. A shift in a demand or supply curve occurs when a good's quantity demanded or supplied changes even though price remains the same. A decrease in the price of a demand complement increases the demand for a product, and similarly an increase in the price of a demand substitute increases demand for a product. The degree to which a demand or supply curve reacts to a change in price is the curve's elasticity. Supply describes the economic relationship between the goods price and how much businesses are willing to provide.